This is the news and talk of Nevada. Now, the Dan Mason Show on News Talk 780, KOH, and KKOH.com.
This is where we talk about what really matters here in Northern Nevada at 852-TALK and toll-free 800-564-KKOH. By the way, just announced the 8 o'clock national keyword for 4K a day, SMILE. S-M-I-L-E. Text it right now to 95819. You got a chance to win $1,000, 4K a day at 8 a.m., 11 a.m., 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. here on News Talk 780 KOH. Folks, as we begin this Monday, it becomes more frightening, I think, on a daily basis to observe the, as Bill O'Reilly would call it, the spin zone in action. Over the weekend, it was reported in multiple places with a headline very similar to this one. Mark Amodei becomes first House Republican to publicly support impeachment. I was like, oh, my goodness, they've turned him. What do we do? Vote for Bernie. That's what we should do, right? So the question, that's the perception that they're selling it. This is how the spin works. So the congressman was speaking with reporters last week, and the question of impeachment, of course, came up. So what we all want to know, of course, is did he or didn't he say he supported impeachment? And I'll let him answer for himself because Congressman Mark Amodei is here this morning. There you go, stirring the pot again, man.
Well, you know, it had been a while since I said that thing about Paul Ryan not coming back, and so I'm not greedy for national attention, but once in a while, you know, it's appropriate.
You can't be terribly surprised, though, at how they immediately spun that. And what was interesting is I saw a number of articles, and I got a couple of emails, too, where people say, oh, how could Amodei do this? As if nobody else did. Yeah. Virtually everybody else supported this, including the White House, right?
Well, the it is the resolution that said, use regular order with the whistleblower complaint. Okay. And that means you send it to the Senate intelligence folks and the House intelligence folks for them to go through their committee process and see what they produce. So there was a resolution that passed through unanimous consent last week in both the Senate and the House. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the White House supported that resolution. So during the interview, and by the way, I think the Nevada media that participated in the interview basically did a pretty fair job of reporting it. What most people didn't realize is the word inquiry in D.C. has now become synonymous with I support Nancy Pelosi's, let's refer it to 6 committees and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Where it's like, I just thought inquiry meant inquiry, you know? And so if that's a mistake, then fine, I'll own up to that. But multiple times during the interview, I refer to the fact that it was unanimous consent in both houses. The White House supports it. I support looking into it in regular order. Let's, quote, follow the rules, unquote. And so from that, somebody basically saw inquiry in one of the articles and went, so I guess my timing was bad. Maybe if I'd have done that press conference today instead of Friday, there'd be other stuff going on. But it was like, so now it's like Amodei's the first Republican, which is hilarious. I know. Because I'm getting criticized by some of the like indivisible folks. He votes with the president 98% of the time. You know, I've been with him since the Billy Bush stuff. Never wavered, and so it's like now all of a sudden I missed my opioid dose or something, yeah. And I've totally but what's and it shouldn't be surprising, but it's like and people like instantly like oh my God, and he needs to be basically it's like trying to go steady, I guess, with some people in the 3rd grade. It's like it's tough to keep that stuff going, you know.
No, but it is probably one of the better examples we've had recently of how the spin zone works. And I got an email from someone over the weekend, a couple of them, as a matter of fact, but one of them in particular immediately, lambasted. How could he do this? He's catering to the liberals and all of this stuff. And I wrote back and said, whoa, do your homework. He was not the only one. This was, as you just mentioned, unanimous. House, Senate, White House. And, of course, they wrote back to me and go, oh, you're right. I looked into it. But that's what they want to happen is for people to hear this and buy it without doing their homework.
Hey, and by the way, I guess the reason they keep doing it is because this is a perfect example of it works. So I've been doing this for a while. I mean, it's like, listen, unfortunately, this comes with the territory. And so I recognize that. We try to treat everybody with respect. And so I think that, Breitbart did a couple of great articles. Chuck Muth did something on there. I saw Chuck's
newsletter yesterday.
Even Humberto Sanchez, who was the reporter for the Nevada Independent, did a follow-up piece, which was very fair. And so the irony of all this is I'm sitting here going, those Nevada press outlets, that were on that phone call, I think did an accurate job of reporting. The fact that we didn't realize that inquiry had now become a buzzword for something other than just, and generally, is like, well, okay, I guess. But in the context of the whole 40-minute interview, it's like you can't listen to that tape, which is out there, where I refer to unanimous consent multiple times, and the White House supports this, and get it mixed up. So I think that's where you get the East Coast spin stuff, to where it's like, okay.
And in this case, it wasn't everybody, because there were some what I would describe as left-leaning media outlets who came out and said, no, this is BS. That is not what the congressman said. So at least there were some lucid people out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how some of the people that you would think are your political enemies the day before, it's like, well, this doesn't fit the narrative against him at all. So now some of them are, I think, confused, but it's like, hey, welcome to the national news cycle as reported by those east of the Appalachians.
Yeah, and there's a lot flying around on both sides of this. The president, another tweet storm yesterday, he wants to meet the whistleblower and confront him, and the odds of that happening I don't think are very high. But you've read the whistleblower complaint.
Yeah.
Are you troubled? You've got to be troubled by the fact that whoever this person is was not in the room, and everything is hearsay. And what gets me about that is, what do we hear about on, in courtrooms all the time? Well, no, hearsay. No. But it's okay now.
I mean, it's kind of like this whole thing on inquiry versus something else, where it's like, hey, if you're trying to fulfill a narrative, then you're going to basically write it to fulfill that narrative. I should also mention, it's like, listen, Kevin McCarthy called me on Friday and goes, hey, what's going on? And I said, well, that's what you get when Cal State Bakersfield beat UNR in basketball a couple of years ago. But anyhow, talked to Kevin, talked to Steve Scalise, and said, hey, the articles are accurate. I just don't understand how this basically got to the point where somehow I'm a D, and talked with Mick Mulvaney a couple times. It's like, so we're fine. Somebody from the New York Times says, are you getting any blowback from leadership or whatever? And I said, well, not from leadership or the White House. I've spoken with them.
No.
I said, I am getting blowback from some misinformed conservatives and Laura Ingraham. I said, but you know what? That's
really
fine.
Laura fell for this?
Yeah. The person who rants and raves against fake news and blah, blah, blah. It's like, Jesus, sounds to me like you like it.
Yeah. Mark Amodei, our congressman, here in studio with us this morning on News Talk 780 KOH. Now, you were not in favor of Nancy Pelosi instigating this quote-unquote inquiry.
Well, as a matter of fact, here's another one that little homework will help is when the Senate resolution came over to refer them to the intelligence committees, basically the Democrats were going to run Pelosi's thing with the 6 committees and all that. They had to pull that whole thing back because it broke multiple rules, which they couldn't get around, and substitute the Senate resolution wording word for word. That's what the House adopted versus unanimous consent. So it's like, hey, and by the way, I think I mentioned that during the 40-minute thing too. So the answer to your question is, of course not. I mean, here's the ironic thing. It's like, hey, treat everything by the procedures and the rules. We have confidence in them, although some days you wonder if you should after the FBI stuff and the Department of Justice stuff. But it's like we have confidence in the rules, so let's use them.
The main reason this is a whole lot of nothing is, gosh, when's the last time we had unanimous consent?
Yeah.
From the House and the Senate and the White House. I don't know if I could remember when that happened. It's like, isn't this what everybody's been saying we need?
Well, and so here's the one of the underreported things about the whole deal is they had to pull back their original resolution about referring it to 6 committees and having an inquiry, which is now a very special word.
Yeah.
And they had to pull that back and substitute it with the Senate language. So it's like, you got to play by the rules, even if you're in the majority.
Yeah, and then when you do, they find a way to turn that around on you as well. Because everything that I've seen you said is consistent with what you've always said to me over the years. It's like, hey, we got a process. Let's follow it and see where it goes.
We'll have none of that around here.
And then now that's controversial. So Congressman Mark Amodei is our guest. When we come back, we'll delve into a little bit about what's going to happen as this moves forward.
News Talk 780 KOH.
Welcome back, Monday morning, Dan Mason Show. Congressman Mark Amodei, our guest in studio, stirring the pot over the weekend with a fairly benign comment about the impeachment inquiry. And that's pretty consistent with what you always say, is let's just see what the process brings up, and we'll go from there. And now this was a telephone call with multiple reporters that you took part in, right? And then some of the national news media took it and twisted the information, basically, and it became, I'm in favor of impeachment.
Well, they took Humberto Sanchez's article. Maybe his was the first out. I don't even know. And they basically took that. There must have been not much else going on Friday.
Probably.
And they took that. And it's like, hey, we got something here. Let's go with this. And it's like, well, if it was true, you'd have yourself something.
I was actually surprised, anybody noticed, because, on Friday night is when, I get the Jackie Rosen, Catherine Cortez Masto email dump, where I get about 40 different things on Friday night every week. So I'm thinking, well, how did they see this stuff from Amodei? What's all this?
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so you're on recess for a couple of weeks at the House, and there was talk of calling you back for a vote and all this. What happens now? How does this inquiry proceed? Because I understand we got 6 committees involved. Where does this all go?
Well, the rules say that the committees go through their process of fact-finding, whatever, high crimes, misdemeanors, that sort of stuff. And then if they think it's appropriate, the committees, the committee that's investigating whatever portion of it is, will then make the decision to write articles of impeachment or not, or an article of impeachment. And so you think back, the last time this happened was Clinton. Yeah. And so it's like, I think 3 or 4 articles were sent to the floor of the House from the committee, and then the House takes them up, and they ultimately have a vote. And impeachment is the same as an indictment.
Right.
And so if any of those articles, because not all the ones that were sent to the floor in the House for Clinton were passed, but it was like perjury and something else.
However many articles there are, you vote on them one by one.
Yes.
And there can be multiple ones depending on what we got 6
That's
six
right.
committees.
And the rule is in the House, it's like, listen, it's like everything else in the House. First side to 218 votes wins.
Yeah.
So you go, well, I would expect the House to pass them then, because the Ds are like 225.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, let's see, because quite frankly, there are many Ds in the column that also has many Rs that says, let's see what happens in the process and see how that goes. So they're not tying themselves to an automatic vote against the president. At least right now they're saying. There are also around 30 districts, congressional districts, that basically voted for Trump in 2016, and which Ds now sit in after the 2018 midterms. And so there are Ds that, quite frankly, that are going to be feeling this heat in terms of,
sure,
if you're one of them who votes for it, you better have a solid basis.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and you just vote for it because you got, but then after that it goes to the Senate.
What do you think the possibility, or I guess I should say, it sounds like you're fairly convinced that something is going to come to the floor at some point. How soon might that be? And I just have to ask, are the Democrats just going to try and draw this out as close to the election as they can?
I don't think that with the trajectory it's on now, what was different in what Nancy Pelosi's done in the last 10 days than before is they basically, they're in a hurry this time. Before they say, oh, we think we got it, and it's like, so before you can get too much light on it, yeah, it's like, hey, this train's leaving and it's going fast. And so I think it's like, listen, and I think I said in the interview, it's like, if you guys think you got something, why don't you bring it to the floor right now? Yeah. You got your 218 votes, whatever. Well, they don't have their 218 votes. So that process is going to be important to some of the more moderate Democrats in there, who are not just going to sign up. But I'll tell you what, and I'm not Nancy Pelosi's defender, she's under incredible pressure from a segment of her conference to basically do this. And guess what?
Yeah.
If you want to be the Speaker of the House, you got to have 218 votes. That can be called into question at any time. John Boehner was threatened with it a couple of times.
Sure.
Never happened. But so it's like part of what she's doing, quite frankly, is she's under tremendous pressure from the Al Greens and the far left folks of her conference, to where it's like, you know what, I've got to, if I want to ride this horse, I have to be able to stay in the saddle and produce something for this. So they're off the race. I predict you'll have a impeachment vote, unless it totally implodes at all those committee things, which is possible these days.
Hey, who knows?
That there'll be a vote on the floor.
I've heard
before Thanksgiving.
That's what I've heard. Yeah. I think that would be good. I mean, I want everybody on the record sooner rather than later. We're a year away from a pretty important midterm election. I want to know what. And to your point, a lot of those Democrats, especially in some of those districts where Trump, they're hedging their bets, and they're smart to do that.
Well, and you know what, Dan, that's fair. Judge me by how I vote. I mean, I've always said that. And so it's like, yeah, if you think you're that good, then get that on the floor and let's see where everybody votes.
You know, one of the comments you made that everybody got all fired up about is, I now have a full appreciation of how the president feels.
I know. Might as well. Yeah. And then the old code word sign off, have a nice weekend.
I keep hearing, when referring to the whole Ukraine thing and the phone call and Biden and his son, I keep hearing people say, well, Biden didn't do anything wrong. It's like, we've got him on tape admitting that he pressured them, right? And one of the stories I heard was, wow, the whole trial about or the whole thing with the prosecutor in Ukraine, it was kind of on the back burner, and they weren't really pushing it at the moment. And my response to that is, well, that doesn't mean it went away.
Yeah.
So that would, of course, still motivate the former vice president into doing what he did. And I'm challenging people to tell me what they think the difference between the two is.
You know, that's emblematic of a lot of stuff floating around. Like, you know, where are we at with the Comey stuff? Where are we at with the McCabe stuff? Where are we at with the FISA court stuff? Because if you want to talk about let's let the system run through and see what it says, it's like, you know, and I'm not going to prejudge them any more than anybody else, but it's like, hey, we got a lot of stuff that, quite frankly, before it's put through the process, doesn't sound good. And so it's like, where are we at on that stuff?
I did see over the weekend that the State Department has stepped up their supposedly ongoing inquiry into the whole Hillary email situation, that they've got new information, and that's got a higher profile again all of a sudden. But I'm kind of with you. It's like, you know, Hannity, for example, has been telling us for months and months and months, oh, it's all going to come out. And I'm like, fine, when?
Yeah.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, if there's something there, let's get it out and have a look at it.
It's kind of the exact same premise. If you got something, let's hear it. And if you don't, can we move on and start running the country again?
Well, and Dan, you know, the other thing is, I remember when Kevin McCarthy was given all sorts of criticism because when we were in the majority, he said something that basically said, hey, we're doing this because, quite frankly, there are political implications. And everybody went nuts back east. Oh, my God, you're doing stuff because it's political. That's your reaction. So I sit there now and they're saying, well, do you think this is political? And I said, I think that's on the interview tape too. I kind of laughed. I said, hey, everything's political. You know, I mean, and whether it's supposed to be or not, everything has political implications. So let's just move right along, quite frankly, into, well, of course it's political. It's in D.C., but let's see what the facts are.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, you know, which way you drive to work is political back there. So to say, hey, do you think this is political, is to say, like, hey, are you breathing the atmosphere on the planet? Yeah.
Yeah, some days facts seem to matter everywhere except in politics.
Yeah.
And the spin is what it is. And
that's fair.
They tried to get you with the spin, and you know, a nice epic fail again on that one. So.
Well, you know, it's like, hey, you take it as it comes, and some days this comes with the territory, and so that's fine. We'll keep plugging away.
All right, well, stay in touch. We'll see what happens. I hope you're right that this all somehow wraps up by Thanksgiving, but I don't know that any of this ever truly wraps up as it pertains to the president. Well, and here's the thing, too. The longer it goes, the less, you know, it's like, well, I mean, let's face it. If you got the smoking gun, you want to show it to everybody. And the longer you go without seeing a gun with smoke coming out of it, that does not strengthen your case. Yeah, and the guy who kept saying for 2 years that he had the smoking gun was Adam Schiff, and we know how that turned out. He's got nothing. The history is not good. No. Congressman Mark Amodei, always a pleasure. Thanks for stopping by and clearing the air, so to speak. You bet. Thank you, Dan. You bet.